Hey everybody, this is Heidi, and you're listening to the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast. We all know that the fashion industry is brutally competitive and it takes loads of hard work to get ahead. The problem is that everyone's secretive and tight-lipped about their ways. After working as a designer and educator for over a decade, I wanted to help break down those barriers and bring you valuable knowledge from industry experts, and this show is exactly where you'll find that. Whether you're trying to break into the fashion world, make yourself more marketable, launch your own label, or become a successful freelancer, we'll help you get ahead in the cutthroat fashion industry. This is episode 15 of the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast, and today I'm chatting with Kathleen Fasanella, author of one of the fashion industry's best resource books called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Sewn Product Manufacturing. Kathleen's a trained pattern maker with almost 4 decades of experience and now owns a factory in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In the interview, she shares why speaking the right language can help factories and vendors take you seriously, how to make sure your production stays on track so you don't get bumped to the back of the line, and why designing isn't always as glamorous as it can seem.
What designers really do in real life, I would never, ever want that job. Designers in real life have extremely difficult jobs. You know, they're project managers.
Before we jump into the interview, I want to remind you can help the show out and make it easier for others to discover by leaving a rating on iTunes. If you enjoy this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you take 60 seconds to do that. Visit sfdnetwork.com/review to leave your rating, and thanks for your support and help. To access the show notes for today's episode, visit sfdnetwork.com/15. Now, on to the interview with Kathleen. So, tell us just a little bit about kind of who you are in the industry and what you do.
Okay. I'm a pattern maker, and I've been doing it for 37 years. I started my career working for brands back when we still had factories in the U.S. and everybody manufactured their own stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I started freelancing in 1995. So I guess that's 22 years now. And, I'd been doing consulting before then. The term consultant was always kind of it was not something you ever wanted to admit to anybody in polite company that you did. It's funny how things have turned around. But so I was a production troubleshooter. And so I would, went through, different plants, mostly in the Americas, and would do troubleshooting in those factories so they would be, optimized. And, I did training, but in factories. So it's kind of been, strange, I guess, different, certainly, just the turnabout, how things, work now. Anyway, so about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I just got bored, and it was becoming increasing. I do my work. I do the pattern and prototyping and the training and all that kind of stuff, and then pass it off to contractors for the contractors to do production. And then what happened was it was becoming increasingly more difficult for me to find contractors who could do the kind of work that we're known for here. We do more higher end type products. We do complex production, coats, suits, that kind of stuff. Certainly more complexity as far as products are concerned, not tees and not t-shirts, yoga pants, and that kind of stuff. We don't really do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So in order to find contractors that did more, complex production, it was just becoming harder and harder and harder. So we decided to open up our own factory, and then thought it would be a good opportunity to realize some long-term goals that I had that kind of, things that I've been working on through the years, and just was never able to do it in kind of a more expedited fashion, which is specifically the manufacturing boot camps that we do, which is it's strictly a charity. People they don't understand, they think that they're supporting me and my business by signing up for boot camp, and it's like, no, we lose money on this, but we bring people in twice a year. We bring volunteers in from all over the world, and over 4 days, we cut and sew products that we then donate to charity. And the products that we make are complex. We're not making T-shirts and sweatpants. We're making children's coats, children's winter coats. This last spring, we do it in the fall, we do it in the spring, and in this last spring, we made 200 pairs of pants. Most of our products go to needy kids on New Mexico reservations. We are dead last in every economic indicator and social indicator in the United States. We're like 50th place for everything. So we keep our products here, and we bring people in from all over the world, and it's very successful. We don't really need to advertise it. I do an announcement, and we're full. I announce 6 months in advance when registration's open, and we fill in 30 minutes.
Wow. That's amazing. And what type of people are coming to this boot camp, and what are their goals? Are these people who just want to have a further understanding of the manufacturing process, or are these people who are doing it to help and give back on a charitable level, as you mentioned, or what are some of their goals in terms of attending the boot camp?
Well, we have a range of people, which is great. I like to have a whole cross-section. I'm pulling up the bios of these people, but for example, some people want to start their own lines, okay? Mm-hmm. So they want to know more about the process and that kind of thing. Mm. We have people that are employees of other companies. So we probably have, I'm going to do a count. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Probably about 30%. At least 30% of the people who come already have jobs in the industry, and they work for other companies. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times their companies pay for their training here. Mm. So, and then other people are just, curious. And frankly, I wish we had more of them because, some of the designers that sign up, they basically don't have any skills. But the few, we get home sewers, people that sew as a hobby. Mm-hmm. We get a very small percentage of them, but I really like them because the ones that are brave enough to sign up for this usually have really solid skills, and they end up being quite valuable. They might not know much about the industrial process, but we do complete training here. Mm-hmm. But they have good handling, they understand construction, they understand how things go together. You don't have to explain to them that you need to backstitch, when you're starting and ending a seam. Mm-hmm. But we actually don't have any requirements. I mean, we take people first come, first serve, which means we get, we have, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. About 30% of the signups for this next boot camp basically have no experience, or so little. Yeah. And we've done this before. That's kind of the cool thing that we do is that we're able to take. There's no trick to getting a bunch of very experienced people and doing what we do, churning out 100, winter coats or 200 pairs of pants. If you've got a crack team, people with a lot of experience. It's quite another thing if you've got 30% of your signups don't even know how to sew.
But this is so cool, and this is something I've had conversations with other people about, so I would love to get your insights. A couple things I've heard you say in other interviews that, you guys are slammed and correct me if I'm wrong, but you get more demands than you can handle in terms of manufacturing. And one of the challenges is finding the labor to support that. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we do this, with the idea that people will see this as a viable career, and especially in technical support, because everybody wants to be a designer, but what people don't realize is that for every designer position, there's something like, you need at least 10 other people, 10 to 20 other people to support that position. Mm-hmm. So we're very top heavy right now. We've got all these people who want to be designers and nowhere, not even close to the number of people to support them. you know.
And so what this leads to, which it sounds like some of the conversations I've had with other people could be correct from what I think I'm hearing you say, is that if I'm interested in breaking into fashion, but like you said, there's a million designers and a fraction of that in terms of job availability, it's really, really tough to get in. So instead of going to design school, spending a bunch of money, and then having a really hard time finding a job, I could take this alternative route, go learn some of these skills from the ground up and build, which I think could ultimately lead to a million other opportunities, but just taking this as an alternative route where there is a lot of opportunity for me to find a job, to learn a skill that's needed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a job is what? As a designer, is that an alternative route to being a designer? What are you saying?
Not as a designer. I mean, I think as you and I have already discussed, it's really, really saturated. It's really tough. But I want to work in fashion and on some level, and I want to get my foot in the door. And maybe I don't have the means to go to college for 4 years and get some type of a degree. And so I see this as an alternative route to breaking into the industry on some level and getting all this exposure to all the fascinating stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, but the other thing too is you have to be technically oriented. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of people aren't entirely sure what that involves. You know, people have this idea that, you know, I like to bring people in here because they can see what my job is really like. I think they just think that, you know, here it's just a bunch of drudgery, you're doing the same thing every day, it's not interesting, and it's like, and they want to do something creative, and that's actually quite insulting, you know, because we're not drones, we're not robots. Mm-hmm. We also need to be involved and engaged in our work, and we need to be inspired by it and have a mission and be happy with what we're doing and doing good work. So, you know, I am nothing if not creative all day long, mm-hmm. you know, but it's solving problems so somebody doesn't go broke, or, you know, somebody orders 45-inch wide fabric instead of 60-inch wide fabric. You know, that really takes some chops to make mm-hmm. that happen for somebody without, you know, them getting buried. So, you know, I think this is a great business to be in, and I think that if somebody's interested in getting into the business, that's great. But you have to be inclined. You know, you have to have mechanical aptitude. And the thing I run across over and over again, women who sew, they say they have no mechanical aptitude, and they don't understand. No, sewing is the very definition of mechanical aptitude. Mechanical aptitude doesn't mean working with machines. It means putting things together. Mm-hmm. So as long as they can tap into that and then, you know, be affirmed and all that, then they do great. Like, you know, my assistant, she'd never handled a screwdriver when she started here. And it's like, well, you know, Chica, you're going to have to pick up that screwdriver. And now she's fearless. Well, she's not fearless. She, you know, has fear, but she works through it anyway, mm-hmm. you know. So she's really great.
So would you say a good litmus test for someone thinking that maybe this could be an alternative route for a career path, if they can sew and enjoy the process of that, would that be a good indicator? Okay.
That's good. And then also I think it's like, okay, as a designer, you can come into design from another end. You know, if you're an artist or something like that and you've got connections and you've got good horse sense, you know, you can come into the business and make a career as a designer. The reason why they offer you basically have to have a design degree these days to get a job otherwise. And it's mostly just to limit, you know, it's to winnow the field, you know. There's just so many people. It's just one way to eliminate candidates for consideration. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, this. So the thing about this end of it is, so, I mean, in my opinion, you really don't need to have, if you're going to get a job and you don't have a design degree, somebody basically already has the infrastructure set up to support that position. But in a smaller operation, it's not necessarily true. So you really need to have some kind of design background. Now, for technical positions, if you want to do something more than just be a line stitcher, you really do need some education. You really do. You can wing being a designer without a design degree, but you probably should have some kind of degree. And I can get back to that in a minute. But for the technical positions, you need to take pattern making. You need to take construction. You need to take textile science. It would just be, I can't imagine somebody becoming, for example, a pattern maker, which is a very simplistic job title to describe a product design engineer, because it's an engineering job. It's
very complex, yeah.
Yeah. So I just can't imagine somebody doing my job and not having some training. So, and I think, personally, community colleges are great. I think 2 years at a good community college and your, LA Trade Tech is good. I've heard good things about Seattle Community College, El Centro College in Dallas. These colleges that are maybe off the beaten track. People think of FIT and they think of SCAD and stuff like that. And those schools don't have a good reputation for technical support. And this is the other thing. People out there listening, they think this sounds boring and everything, but let me tell you, I make twice as much as designers do. Pattern makers, just because we're not leading the process and we're not in charge and we're not in magazines or whatever doesn't mean that we're poorly compensated. We are very well compensated.
And there's a high demand for that placement, correct? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Because it's a hard job and you have to be able to take people yelling at you all the time, blaming you for everything. So you have to have a thick skin,
I think you have to have a thick skin anywhere in the industry. But, obviously certain roles are a little bit more intense than others. And I'm fascinated by the engineering. And like you say, pattern maker is a very simple name for something that is genuinely insanely complex and technical. And the engineering that goes into turning flat fabric into a three-dimensional form is fascinating. So I think it's brilliant what you guys do. And it's not a skill that I have. So I think that's a really interesting alternative route, and I'll link to all those community colleges that you mentioned in the show notes. And that was going to be my next question, is that I think there's opportunity to get education on this without spending an arm and a leg and looking at community colleges and vocational schools, and then maybe even, getting real behind the scenes experience by doing something like your guys' boot camp program. And combined, you can take that up and package it up into a really great skill set that's very marketable.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Just having an interest in the technical side of it instead of just wanting to be a designer,
So I'd love to talk a little bit more also about, you guys manufacture and you work with a lot of designers, I think on a varying scale, from small independent designers to more established brands. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about the process. So a lot of people in the audience are wanting to start their own label, or maybe they already have their own label. And I think one of the challenges and one of the questions I get all the time is, how do I even go about finding a manufacturer? And so I'd love to kind of get some insights on, what's the best process people out there can follow when they're thinking about approaching someone like you, or, what does that even look like, and how would you advise people to go about that in the smartest way possible?
Okay, well, first we need to back up first. Okay, there's two. This business has become increasingly splintered between new companies and new ideas, and I don't know what you want to call it. Okay, people who have just a different vision and mindset of how things should be done, versus people who are established and have been in the business for years. Okay. So there's a big split right there. Okay, and basically most of the new people fail. I don't know what the failure rate is, probably 95%.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it's super, super high. People who do it more traditionally, in other words, the way that it should be done. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy what people are doing. People that prepare, and prepare beyond what they've decided that they're willing to do. In other words, they want to go on to a blog and see a YouTube video, 2 minutes, or like see this podcast, and then they're ready to manufacture.
Right.
No, not happening. You'll be one of the 95% who fail.
Yeah.
But the biggest piece of advice I could tell anybody on this program who is listening, who really wants to make it, is semantics. I mean, vocabulary, terminology matters so hugely. So right now, you said, for example, you came to me and you were talking about you're looking for a manufacturer over and over and over. I would write you off immediately, just immediately. I would just go on, look for a tactful way to end that conversation and move on, okay? Because legally, this is not my opinion. Legally, you are the manufacturer. And I don't know how many times I keep telling people this. I am a contractor. It's a legal definition. It's not semantics. It's not, I realize that there's all these people. You go out on the web in this space and you see everybody talking about manufacturer and they're talking about somebody like me. Mm-hmm. Legally, I am a contractor. Mm. So right away, I know somebody who either doesn't want to bend or doesn't pay attention. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the thing with manufacturer is that manufacturer does not mean that you actually cut and sew it under your own auspices. It means that you are the brand. In other words, every time somebody says, oh, I'm just a brand, what they mean is, no, you're a manufacturer. The brand is the manufacturer. So there are plenty of people, there's all these businesses out there now that feed on new people. Okay, we call them vampires. Okay, and they love it when you talk that way because they know you don't know anything. I mean, if you're describing yourself as a brand and you're looking for a manufacturer, automatically they know you don't know anything. And there's just no other way to say it. So you look for a sewing contractor. If you look for a sewing contractor, your experience will be completely different because all of a sudden you're going to find people that you had never known were there.
So would that be true even for if I'm just like blindly diving into Google to start doing some research, and instead of looking for apparel manufacturer, I type in apparel sewing contractor? Just
type in sewing contractor. Don't even type in apparel.
Okay. So there's my first step. And again, I don't have expertise working stateside, and I know that it's doesn't matter. The terminology is still the same, but in my experience, I've always said manufacturer. So that's really fascinating to me, and a really great learning point. Because regardless of where I'm manufacturing, overseas, stateside, I'm still working with a sewing contractor.
Correct.
Okay.
You're the younger generation. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. There's like a break between people who worked in factories, who literally worked for manufacturers, and now we're all freelancing. We're all contractors.
Okay. So my first step is to approach it as I'm looking for a sewing contractor and understand that I am the manufacturer and I am outsourcing to a sewing contractor to physically make the product.
Right, because all the liability of the brand rests with the manufacturer. In other words, the brand. Mm-hmm. And this is extremely important, even if you're not making like children's clothes, for example.
Sure.
Okay. It's a matter of law. It's federal law. It's IRS. It's Federal Trade Commission. So it's not like it's my opinion or whatever. Mm-hmm. State law. But say that there's a problem with your product, all the liability rests with you. Mm-hmm. So, I'm just speaking domestically.
Sure.
But say that there's, a chemical or something in the fabric or whatever that you sourced or whatever that you had sent to the contractor and they sewed it up for you. So, if you're going to get sued, the brand, the manufacturer gets sued because all the liability for the product rests with the manufacturer. So that's why I will always stress to the nth degree, I am not the manufacturer because I don't want to get sued. Mm-hmm. I'm not responsible for whatever fabric you bought, you know?
I've contracted you to perform a service.
Correct.
And and you cut that fabric, you sew it together in the most simple terms possible, but at the end of the day, that finished product is my responsibility.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, say that there's a problem. For example, you send off a bunch of product to Saks or whatever, and all the buttons fall off. You know, Saks is not going to say, hey, who sewed this up? I'm going to go get chargebacks from them. Mm-hmm. They're going to go to you. Okay? They're going to go to you and say, hey, all the buttons fell off. We're going to charge you, you know, $5 a garment to sew them back on. All right? Which is really painful. So you would have to go back to your contractor and get, you know, redress from them. Mm-hmm. So, but it's a civil arrangement as opposed to, you know, like, you know, health and safety liability, although it could be with kids wear, you know?
Sure.
So
rewinding then, the first step is to look for a sewing contractor. But beyond that, I mean, there's so many, and I've read tons of the articles on your blog. You know, I think there's a lot of challenge for these designers when it comes to approaching someone like yourself, who has a factory, who has the ability to sew the product that I want to get sewn, in terms of like, where do they even start, and how do they know if they're ready to approach you, and what do they need to have prepared when they do approach you? You know, what does that whole process look like? And at what point do you say, okay, this is the right time to approach me, and this is when I would start to take you and your product seriously, and we'd really look into getting the ball rolling on getting this made?
Okay. You know, it's just so varied. We're very flexible here because educating the customer has always been a strong element of my business from day one. I mean, I can tell you how it works. I can tell you a variety of examples, but basically, you know, when you're ready to write a check, you know, or to make a credit card payment or whatever you want to do, it doesn't work to call somebody up. I totally understand why people do this, but they call up somebody like me with this timeline, you know, oh, I want to do this and this and this and this, and then they ask you all kinds of questions, and then you find out they're nowhere near ready to place an order to even have patterns made. You know, they're interviewing people. Okay, which I totally understand. But me and everybody else is just going to write you off immediately. So what you should realize is that when you're going to call somebody on the phone to talk to them potentially about hiring them, I guess the first thing to think of is, are you prepared to put down a deposit if the conversation with this person goes well? Okay? All right. So, and there's ways that you can do this and mitigate your risk. Okay. For example, you call me up and say, you know, I've got this line of dresses I want to put out, and you know, if I'm not going to accept a deposit to produce all 10 of your dresses. Okay. If somebody does that, you just run. You know what I mean? Just get somebody else. Anybody who's any good is going to say, look, you know, let's just do one. You know, let's just a test here, because just like you need to test these people to make sure that they are executing according to your parameters and your wishes, and you can communicate with them and stuff. Well, we need to make sure that you're, you know, not crazy or a Fruit Loop, you know? So it's on both sides, you know? So, but the point is that you need to just don't call anybody unless you're prepared to place an order, like, you know, as soon as the work materials arrive, you should be arranging for that right then. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, hiring 3 different people to do the same thing. You know, you have one style and you can farm it out to 3 different groups, you know. So, and I realize it's expensive, but again, if you are hiring like older generation garmentos who are much more highly skilled and all this other kind of stuff, as opposed to somebody who calls themselves a manufacturer, it's going to be a lot cheaper. It's going to be so much cheaper. It's crazy. Like, there's this business I don't know, I think they've been in business for 7 years, but people have great ways of dressing up their experience. And, we have 70 years of combined experience. And it's like, I know these people, and they, that they were getting coffee at Ralph Lauren. They weren't doing anything else. You know what I mean? We all know each other, or we know of.
It's a
people.
Small industry.
Yeah. So, they have these great websites and everything. But for example, this one person approached me and said they wanted me to do this yoga pant for them. Well, a yoga pant is it's not out of our wheelhouse, but it's kind of a simpler product, and we do more complex stuff. We just like challenging things, and nobody wants to do challenging anymore. So anyway, he's wanting to quote. Well, I don't quote because, I never know what somebody's going to do. I never know if they're going to change a feature when I've already finished the pattern for the first design, and then they want to change everything. Well, changing the pattern all over again or changing the fit, none of that's free. So we have to create a new stuff. So I charge hourly, and I never know what the person's going to do or be or anything. So, but, I'm looking at this design, and he's like, well, I got this quote for like $4,600. And I'm like, what? I mean, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And apparently that's the going rate among these new companies that we call vampires. Okay. So, and he said, yeah. And I looked at, he said, look, I'll send you over the quote. So I looked at it, and I was just floored. I said, we would charge, $400,
Wow.
or $500 to do this. I was like, I can't even imagine justifying charging almost $5,000 to do this thing. And you know what? He didn't hire me. And I've had this happen over and over. People don't hire me because they think that, I don't know, that we're up to no good, or we must not be any good because we're not charging these rates of people that they can find easily in the social space. Because old-timey garmentos and stuff are much more difficult to find if they even have a website.
Sure. They're not hanging out on Instagram, posting these
Exactly.
perfect behind-the-scene pictures.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, okay, so you mentioned the time to approach you or anyone really is when you are ready to write the check. So what does that really mean? Do I have, I'd like to get a little bit granular here. Do I have my fabric sourced and I have my design sketched out and I've got a rough idea of what I want to do, but I don't have patterns made and I don't have a physical sample made, like really where am I at? And I come to you and I'm like, okay, I have some cash and I have a sketch, but maybe I don't have my buttons picked out, or I do have my buttons. Like, where should I really be?
Okay. So the first thing I want to do with somebody is, so we're on the same page, we get people in varying stages. So if you're just at that stage, you're at the conceptual stage. Okay. So what I'll want from you is an idea of, well, for one thing, one thing that will tell me about construction and the type of finishing that's in your product is who you intend to sell to. You're probably not going to be selling in a store, but if you were going to be selling in a store, what store would that be? And not only what store would that be, but you look at a rack in a store and they'll have a variety of different brands on that rack. And we call that who you hang with. Okay. All those brands are commensurate. So I'm going to ask you, who do you hang with? And I mean, who is going to be on the same rack as you are at the store? Okay. So that will tell me kind of, what family you're in. Okay.
Okay.
And then a lot of people, they don't know what they want. So it's like, who is your customer? Some people have very defined wish lists. Some people are just middle of the market. Some people, if they can tell me. And then as far as how you express your idea, I'm very open to that. Some people, they either have a garment, for example, I need something to go by fit-wise. So if you have, for example, a dress, You like the way it fits, but it doesn't look you're not copying that dress.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But you like that fit. You have your own ideas of what that looks like. So you would send me the dress, and then you would send me the type of material that you would be using for that dress, not the actual fabric. But for example, if you're going to be making it out of Georgette, say silk double Georgette, right? Send me a nice poly Georgette,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want anything in black, nothing in dark navy, nothing in a dark color at all. Even if your final design will be in black and dark colors, okay? Because we can't see fitting mistakes in dark colors. So they're just invisible. So we like to see the worst, so that's a light color. If you don't have your buttons or whatever, just send me some buttons that will be similar to what you envision using.
Okay.
If you can't draw, that's fine. You can go on the web. You can create a collage and say, I like this collar, I like that sleeve, I like this cuff, I like, that kind of thing. And then if you're somebody who has to be, everybody is so different. Okay. Some people I recommend, that's just not good enough for them. And I get it. So what they do is I tell them to go to the thrift store and to buy product. Okay. Because if they're very particular and nuanced, for example, about certain kinds of seams, and they don't know how to articulate that, then you can go to the store, you can buy a product that's got those types of seams, and I would recommend that you cut it up.
Mm-hmm.
And you put those on cards, on index cards, because, again, you're not just hiring me, you're hiring maybe 2 other people to do the same project,
mm-hmm.
Okay? And if you're hiring old garmentos, they're going to be charging you, $75 to $125 an hour. They're not going to be charging you $5,000,
Mm-hmm.
So you can say, you could do a rough sketch, and you can, number your index cards and put, circles with, you can label each seam in your sketch and say, I want this seam here. It just takes a little creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I've had other people buy a garment at the store and then take masking tape and, 2-inch wide masking tape, and just lay it down on the garment, with arrows everywhere or whatever, and they actually write on the garment what they want, changes that they want, deviations.
Mm-hmm.
So that works too.
I love the suggestion of cutting up garments, and that's something I've done and I've advised to other people. Like, if you don't know what something's called or you don't know how to draw it, find an example and cut it apart and tape it and give it to, there's nothing better than a real life example of how you want something done.
Yeah, exactly.
That's going to be the easiest for you to follow than trying to figure out what terminology and jargon everyone's using, and does it really mean the same thing?
Well, that is the huge problem that we've got right now. There's something called Gresham's Law, which it's a law of economics in which if you have too much bad in the marketplace, it actually chases out the good. Mm. Okay, so it's kind of the situation we've got right now. We've got a lot of people, for example, that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever, started clothing lines and they failed. And they had all these people coming to them and saying, well, hey, how did you do that? And instead of people really realizing, wait a minute, why do I want to get advice from somebody who failed in their business? Mm-hmm. I don't understand people's thinking. So before you know it, these people become consultants. Okay. And so, but they're very good at social media. They're very good at, putting stuff. I read all these articles out there, and most of them are just terrible. And so they don't use terminology appropriately. So that's really the thing that kind of scares me the most. Doesn't kind of scare me. It does scare me. So somebody uses a term, and many times I cannot tell from context if we're talking about the same thing. They don't, you don't have to be an expert on the difference between a cover stitch and a flat lock. So going to the thrift store and cutting something up is a great solution for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so I'm prepared monetarily. That can be a tough space, though, I think, because I don't even, if I have to be prepared monetarily, but I have no idea what this is really going to cost, how do I do that? Or, a lot of designers raise funds for their first round of production on Kickstarter or something like that. And obviously before you get into production, there's still a lot of expenses, but how do I even give a rough estimate of like, okay, how much do I have to have saved? Or maybe I'm getting some money from friends and family, or, wherever the cash is coming from. It's almost like the chicken and the egg.
Yes. So it depends too. Okay. Yeah. Those are all very good questions. All I know is that I prefer that people basically have very little money, because people who have a lot of money tend to blow a lot more money. So people's spending priorities are much different from what mine would be. Much, much, much different. So much so if people want to do certain things, I just say, we can't help you moving forward. If somebody wants to cut, 100, 500 or 1,000 of something and they don't have any orders, we don't accept the order.
Yeah.
So I think that people really need to be, they need to listen to the contractor. If they're telling them, look, don't do this, that means don't do it. So we've got a lot of these new businesses out there that call themselves manufacturers or whatever, and they're more than delighted, because they know that you're a one-shot customer. You won't be back, so. And the thing about us is that we're developing a relationship over the long term. We want you to keep coming back. We don't want to have to continually re-educate you. Always have a new customer that always have to bring up to speed, because it's just no fun. There's no continuity. You don't create community. All that kind of stuff. So, for example, I have one customer who couldn't draw, couldn't do any of that kind of stuff, and has no background in it. She's actually in law enforcement and with a technical product. And so she came to me, and we've did all the product development, all that kind of stuff. And so she's getting ready for her production run, and we have no minimums here. But she comes to me and she says, she has an expensive product, suits and stuff, So she thought she had to have, 500 suits or 250 suits. And it was like, no. I said, do you have orders for those? No, I'm just going to go to this show and show them and stuff. And I said, well, we worked out what her size range should be. And then from that, her size ratio. Okay, that's how we determine how much a production run should be, which is a whole other thing we could do a whole podcast on. People don't even know how to order for production. They don't even know how to order.
How many smalls, how many mediums, how many larges. When you mention size ratio, just to clarify for listeners. But yeah, continue on.
Yeah, so once we worked out her ideal size ratio and her two colorways, I said, okay, the maximum you need is 48 pieces. And she was absolutely blown away. She was prepared to do 10 times that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, I would rather do just the 48 pieces and her still have enough money to come back, next season than, have her financially committed to 500 pieces that she would never sell. And the stuff, it dates quickly. Fashion has a very short, shelf life. It's fragile. So, somebody who is really interested in your long-term longevity and they get what you're about and everything is going to want you to do less rather than more. And of course, you run into a lot of factories and stuff, and they say, you have to have this kind of minimum and that kind of minimum, but it's only because they've been burnt so many times, and it's difficult to deal with a small customer because a lot of times the customer thinks that it's our obligation, to take them by the hand and lead them through everything. But, a factory that is small enough to be interested in doing your order is small enough that the owner themselves is working the floor in one way or another. They're either repairing a machine or, maybe sewing. In my case, I'm making patterns and markers and grading.
Yeah.
So we don't have a dedicated customer service person. So if you need something like that, you need to go to another kind of business. Okay? So I personally think that you're better served by, people always say, okay, what advice would you give me? And I give them advice and they do not follow it. I say, read this post or read this or do that. And they don't do it. They come back and they ask for more advice. And it's like, I'm all tapped out, So if you don't listen to what people say, and it's not a situation of, people always think, okay, well, I don't want to do that one thing. What's another way to get the same thing? And it's like, there is no other way.
And on that note, I mean, I'll just, and I'll definitely put this in the show notes, but your website is this insane, vault of so much content and education and resource. So I think someone who's trying to come into this from zero, if they spent a couple weeks and just totally binged on a lot of the content, that would put them light years beyond most people.
Right.
And, something you said to me in a previous conversation we had was, a lot of the times the people who want to do this aren't really serious. They say they have this idea, and I think, people think about this like fantasy lifestyle of like, oh, I have this, my fashion brand. But the people who are really serious are few and far in between. And I don't want to mock anybody who's out there with this amazing idea that wants to do something, but it's a lot of work. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into this. And if you really want to do this seriously, then you as the manufacturer, not talking to you, Kathleen, but you talking to you out there in the audience, you as the manufacturer, as the brand, the label, the designer, need to spend some time and energy investing yourself in getting educated. And if you don't have the energy to do that, then, boy, you really don't have the energy to go through the whole process, because that's a drop in the bucket, the education.
It is a lot of work. People think that they can just present a sketch and, farm everything out. And it's just not, the thing, what designers really do in real life. I would never, ever want that job. Designers in real life have extremely difficult jobs. They're project managers. And so their job is to keep, everything on the rails and schedule, even with buffer in there, to make sure that everything comes together at the right time. It's all the designer's responsibility, and it's, you have to be able to get along with people. You have to be able to get people to work together. You need to have a certain amount of confidence in your process and what you're doing and in other people to get them to, for example, to trust each other. Like in my case, it's very, like if we're not doing the patterned work, but we're just doing the grading and we need to send the markers somewhere else, I don't force people to go through you for everything. Put your contractor and your pattern maker together. Let them talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And then that way I can get, for example, what kind of file formats they have. If they want, do they want a cut file? Do they just want a plot? If they want it plotted, do they have a pen plotter? Do they have, an inkjet, or what kind of file format they're running? What version? And with the designer who wants to control everything, you're forced to go through the designer back and forth, and it's just cognitively draining. And so me, I just don't have the energy for it. And so what happens, and a lot of people don't, we start out with good intentions, but if you force us to do that kind of stuff, it's like, oh man, I got to call them again to get answers to this. And then they have to call the contractor, get the answers. And maybe the contractor's annoyed that this person is not using their time efficiently. And so I won't hear back for who knows how long. So your project will get shunted off to the side in favor of somebody else's project where, the designer has facilitated the situation in such a way that I can go directly to who I need to talk to in order to move forward on this. I can get an answer quickly,
So I'd love to talk a little bit more about like this concept of open, honest, and transparent communication that can really facilitate the process and help you get through the whole production line faster. And I'm sure, I'm going to make an assumption here that you've heard this a lot, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is designers who have this brilliant idea, but they want you to sign an NDA before they're willing to do anything. Talk a little bit about that and that mindset and what that does or doesn't mean for you as a sewing contractor and how that comes off.
For me now, I'm just grateful. You know, when they whip out an NDA, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a bullet I've dodged, you know. So it's like, next.
It's there's this whole distrust, I think, and it's like, you know what, you're my customer. I am going to take care of you. You have a very high level of confidentiality. I know that you've talked about. You don't tout who your customers are and share their pictures and all that stuff, which is great. But designers are so scared of their ideas getting stolen.
But now I can kind of understand some of that too, because you go out on the web and these, like I'm telling you, these new companies, they put pictures of their customers' products out there. They use their customers' names and brands to market their services. And that's just slimy. I just can't believe nobody is suing them for that. I mean, I'm just shocked that the customer hasn't actually sued them and said, hey, you know, had a lawyer call them and say, hey, remove this, you know? So that is definitely not kosher with people. I mean, with, you know, people I would consider who are legitimate and have been doing this, made a career of this, you know? So, you know, I don't use my customers, to market my services. And if somebody wants to know whether I'm qualified to do their product, you know, they're more than welcome to come out. You can drop in at any time here. Well, for the most part, you know. Yeah, we don't have anything to hide. We're very transparent. But I have a post on my site that talks about confidentiality, about what our standards are here, and why we don't sign NDAs. You know, I have some people that are just really, you know, that there's just no way that they're going to move forward without that. Mm-hmm. And I totally get that, but I can tell you that the people who are most vociferous about that really have a bad reputation among most people. And it's that a lot, from what I've seen, a lot of them are kind of slimy. So if you're not a slimy person, you don't want to be really rigid about that, because that's the impression people are going to have. The other thing I see is that people are actually using IP that does not belong to them. So it's like they want us to sign an NDA so we won't tell on them, you know?
Because they're actually ripping off something else. Interesting.
Yeah. And then the other thing is people do all kinds of stuff that you know, people, you know, the manufacturer will do all kinds of stuff that is crazy. They want to hold me accountable for the integrity of their IP, yet they're posting on social media photographs of and video of their prototypes and all this other kind of stuff. It's like, how am I going to be held accountable for that? Because somebody else can take that information and create products before you even get to market. Mm-hmm. You know? So I can't be held responsible for that.
It's such a delicate dance, though, because I think, you know, for a lot of designers, that's, you know, they're trying to build up hype for what they're doing before they actually go to market. So they're trying to work on building this audience and get everybody really excited about it. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, maybe even doing some Kickstarter campaign to help build funds. And so there's this really awkward, delicate dance where it's like, and I've heard this from textile designers as well. It's like, how much of my design do I put out in the market to show everybody how great it is before I get worried about it just getting ripped off?
It's very difficult, and I don't have that answer. Mm-hmm. All I can tell you is to go to somebody's website like mine. Do you see photographs of any of my customers' products there?
No.
Do you see names of brands that I've worked for? No. So that tells you right there. So, and that's another thing. When people are sourcing for services, they'll go and they get sucked in by glitzy websites because that's what they're used to. Yeah. But the best providers in the business actually have really, you know, they have basically a business card or a site that was like coded in 1995, literally, okay? Mm-hmm. Because they don't need to have a fancy website. They're busy, you know. So it's kind of a rule of thumb, actually, in this business. If they have a really great website, they're usually not, you know, it's the relationship is in the inverse. Yeah. So But if somebody is saying, "Hey, I've done work for so and so and so and so," just think about: do you want everybody knowing that they did work for you?
Sure.
So.
Okay, Kathleen, I want to be respectful of your time. We have just a couple minutes left, but I want to ask one other question and get your thoughts on this. And you alluded to it a little bit earlier of, if me as the designer, let's say I'm working with you on this project and I'm forcing myself to be the liaison between you and everybody else, which is holding stuff up and kind of pushes my product onto the back burner a little bit because it becomes really difficult. But on that same note, I've heard a lot of designers say that their product got pushed back 3 months or 6 months or whatever the timeline is because the factory got this order from some other bigger, more important, better brand, higher dollar, however you want to phrase it. And even if they did have a contract, maybe they did or didn't, what can they do to not get squashed to the back, and should they have a contract, and if the factory the sewing contractor violates that contract that they were supposed to deliver on this date, and it wasn't the designer that held it up, what's some advice you can give people to sort of navigate those situations?
Well, that happens a lot, and it happens here.
Okay.
And I think it's oh gosh, how do I say this? Okay, I can only talk about it in terms of my own experience. Okay. So I'm not saying that designers are not legitimate in their beefs because I've seen it. At the same time, I don't think that they're being wholly honest. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we get a job in, we're scheduling things. Okay. We have these time slots that are available that we've committed to. Okay. So we need, for example, your fabric by X date, okay? We need it that day, or maybe we've got a day or two leeway, but if you call me the day that the fabric is supposed to be here and then you say I'm sending it, what's going to happen is I had your job scheduled. I had it scheduled to be cut, and then it was going to be shade marked, and then we were going to be fusing it, and now all of a sudden my stitchers don't have any work. They don't have any work. So that means I have to send people. I'm probably the only person I know who actually has my stitchers on salary. Okay. Not piecework, not hourly. They're on salary. Okay. So that's the only way that I can get good people and keep them, is to guarantee them income.
Sure.
So what am I going to do? So I'm going to go to the person who was behind you. For example, maybe you had just a small order, 50 pieces. Well, there's this other order that was scheduled after yours, but they already had the fabric here. So what am I going to do? Am I going to put my people, I'm going to take a hit on putting, all these people out of work for a week, which means I'm paying for it, okay? Or am I going to move this other guy's job in front of yours with 1,000 pieces that will take 3 weeks to finish? You tell me.
It's a logical business decision there.
Exactly. So, and people will think, well, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, they think, oh, well, I just forgot my labels. That's no big deal. Like, for example, there's one product that is delayed by like 6 weeks. Okay, because it's kind of hard to describe it, but it's got this large distinctive label that unfortunately is the very first step in the process. We can't, the placement of it is such that we have to sew on the label before we do anything else. But he just thought, he's concentrated on getting the fabric here and this other stuff, but the label, he didn't start ordering it until after the fabric was already here. And then he's arguing with his vendor in LA because the guy advertises, I can get you labels in 48 hours.
Sure.
Okay. And no, because the guy has it done in China. Okay. That's in some cases he can get it in 48 hours. And if you're willing to pay express international shipping, right? So there's lots of qualifiers. So we had to move other jobs in front of his, and we make suits, for goodness sakes,
Yeah.
So I can't, we have two long cutting tables and everything, but all this bundling and sorting of all these products and stuff takes up a lot of space. I don't have room to even cut your product, much less put it in the sewing line. Yeah. And we have a lot of machines, and we're very flexible. We're very modular. For example, all of our machines are on casters, okay? So what we actually do is every time we work on a product, we redesign our sewing line for every single product, which I don't know anybody else who does that either. So we'll pull out all of these machines and put in all new machines based on whatever your product requires, okay? So in order for me to switch products, to start working on your product versus this other product, if they're too far apart, we can't do it.
So what I hear as the biggest takeaway, if I were really going to think about this as a designer, is one, understanding the complexity of scheduling a production line and all the different moving pieces and parts that go into that and being respectful of that. And then two, realizing how one tiny thing, one day, because I forgot to order the labels or whatever happened, throws that whole thing out of whack. And I have to understand and be sensitive to that.
Not understand to be sensitive. I mean, it's an imperative,
Yeah. And so on some level, would it be wise of me to ask you for advice and say, let's say I've come to you, I've hired you as my sewing contractor, we're moving forward, I wrote the check, and maybe I didn't know that the label had to be the first thing to be sewn on because I didn't really understand the logistics of putting the garment together. So if I sat down with you and said, hey, Kathleen, tell me the order priority of getting all these things ordered and to you, and help you say, okay, put the list of 10 things together, and the labels are really the first thing I do because everything else is pending on that. Would that be a wise way to go about it?
As long as you're prepared to pay for it.
You mean in terms of preparing to pay for your time for you to help me put it together? Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Because that's assumed to be your job.
Sure.
Because you need to just have all the stuff that goes into your product just needs to be here for us to start. Mm-hmm. Unless you can get a waiver from the contractor and they say, well, no, we're not going to be using the cuffs or something until, we've got a week before we'd need those. But you would need to get somebody to say, okay, that's okay.
Okay. Otherwise, go into it being prepared, just knowing I need to have everything ready to go right now and not give you something a week later, halfway through the production line.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And then understand that, people don't see, we have so many surprises. We think we understand each other. We think we've communicated, things to people, and there just doesn't seem to be the same understanding of the imperative, for example, the designer in sampling. For example, in sampling, we've made, these garments and the fabric's been 55, 56 inches wide or whatever. There's always a variation, okay?
Sure.
And then for production, we're going to be doing, 3 colorways. So I tell the designer, okay, make sure that all the yardage has the same fabric width. Well, they get out there shopping or whatever in the marketplace, and then they see something. I don't understand the reasoning, okay? But they just they make these purchasing decisions, and they get fabric that's, either a lot wider or a lot narrower. And what they don't understand is that they've tripled. I gave people a price, okay? Say it was, $25, to do this thing. What they don't understand is that they've tripled my cutting costs immediately, right off the top, because I cannot cut 55-inch wide fabric with 45-inch wide fabric. I was counting on being able to stack
all the colors.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay. Now I have to make a new marker, which wasn't in the budget. We have to have. It just completely throws everything off.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's that. So now we actually, because I don't even know, especially if it's somebody's first run, they've never done this before. So we actually charge for cutting separately. And I just am on pins and needles until the stuff comes in because I never know what's going to happen. you know, and then the fabric, you know, I want to know where people are getting their fabric, not because I'm nosy, not because I want to copy you, not because, you know, I want to know your sources. It's just that some suppliers are known to be better than others. Okay. And some, like, it's a lot of people get their fabric from jobbers, and the stuff comes in. It's like I tell people, don't get jobber fabric. Okay. You know, you don't have continuity. There's a lot of flaws. Oh, no, this is first quality and it's just overstock or whatever, and I get it in. And you know what? The face of the fabric is on the outside of the roll. I know it's a jobber. And I know the stuff has already been unrolled once, and it's already been inspected, and it was already rejected by somebody who has a lot more chops. Okay? So I already know we're going to have trouble. And so I told you needed, you know, 200 yards, and maybe there's only 150 usable, you know? But I committed to making the size of this contract was, say it was $10,000. Now we're losing 25% of that lot because of this bad fabric. So now we're looking at $7,500. But I'm putting in just as much effort.
And you have to pick through the fabric.
So do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is why a lot of people don't want to work with small companies, because they're told, do X thing. But the designer goes and does what they want to do anyway. You know, and we don't find out until the fabric actually comes here, and we're like, oh man, you know, because all of a sudden we're getting this huge pay cut, you know, and then, or we can't do the job and we have to move in somebody else's job. So if we've got a job that's got all these warts on it, yeah, it's going to get delayed. Yeah. It's going to get delayed. We're slow, and we have the patience to deal with every wart that has to be excised, you know, as we come to it. So
listen to what Kathleen says. She knows what she's doing, and take her advice and guidance. And yeah, I mean, I know that's come up a couple times in the conversation, and it's something that you know, I've experienced with people as well. Is you give them all this great advice and these great ideas and these great suggestions and guidance, and they don't act on it, or they go and do something completely different. And that's obviously something that happens anywhere, anytime, and is something that we can't train people to do. We can't ingrain. I mean, on some level, I think it's human nature, and it just is a personality thing. And I've been guilty of it too. I won't lie. But good to be mindfully reminded of that. Work with professionals and take the advice and the guidance they give you, and things will tend to go more smoothly.
Yeah.
So, Kathleen, this has been fantastic. Please let everybody know where they can find more information about you and everything that you do.
I have a website. It's the most it's basically an internet. I don't know. It's a repository of information that's used by established companies and to train. You know, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's an institution. It's an encyclopedia of verifiable, genuine information. Yeah. Okay, and that's fashion-incubator.com. Yeah. Fashion-incubator.com. Yeah. And if you go into the archives, there's a, you know, across the nav bar you can see there's the archives. So you can just kind of scroll through there. I don't update it very much recently since we opened the factory. I'm just too busy. But there's about 3,000 pages of in-depth information, solid in-depth information. I mean, I know at one point, I think I was looking at one post, seemed a little long to me, and it turned out to be 11 pages printed. 11 printed pages long. So these are not like short bullet point lists or whatever. But if you really want to know what to do and how to do it, you dive deep. And then I wrote a book. I wrote the very first book that there ever was on how to start a company like this. You know, and it's you know, it's from somebody who's been in the business for 37 years. And you can get that. It's a little dated, but the core information with the focus on production and how to prepare for production is solid. There still hasn't been equaled. And then we have a private forum, and it's very cheap to join, but you do have to read the book. You have to buy a new copy to get in your first year free. And it's very cheap, but It's very inexpensive.
Yeah.
But it's more of a community of people, and you have to use your real name. And we do have some famous people on there who use their real name. And then what else? Then we do the boot camp, and then we also do rapid product development. I do a lot of training. For example, people come here and they want to see they want to set up their own factory, or they want to, tour contractor facilities. What should they be looking for? So we'll walk through their product. For example, they'll bring their product and I'll say, okay, they need to have this kind of machine. This is what it does. This is what a good factory has. I explain, for example, the amenities that we have in here, feed rail. I say if they don't have this kind of stuff, then they're not a real contractor. Because if you don't know, it's a small business and you like them and they're nice, but that doesn't mean that they're a good fit for you. So I show people. So people come here and do that, and then sometimes people come and they just want to see what it's like to be in a factory. So we actually have volunteer projects. We make some products for that we donate to the animal shelter, and so people can actually. I've had customers come and they just want to sew all day, and we let them do that.
Yeah. Those are priceless learning experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a nice factory. We remodeled the entire thing. We put in skylights. It's light. It didn't have heat and air. We've got heat and air. We have a complete kitchen, with a stove. And so we do a lot of cooking in here, and it's a nice environment. And right now, as we speak, we're remodeling the exterior. And we're going to have a big mural painted out front. We got new windows, new overhead doors, restucco. We're going to get the mural, and then we're going to have solar.
Oh,
so
wow.
I think we'll be the probably the most energy efficient small factory in the United States.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I want to give an extra shout out to the book because I know I emailed you about this, but I read your book. Oh boy, well over 10 years ago, and it was one of the first books that I ever read, and it is the best. I think it runs about $60, and it's the best $60 you'll ever spend to kind of build your foundation and get your knowledge up to speed. And then joining the community is priceless. Being engaged with other people who are on a similar track as you are, and just getting to have those conversations to help get yourself further along. So a big shout out to that and everything you're doing. And I'll put links to all of this in the show notes. But thank you so much, Kathleen. This has been phenomenal. You're a genuine wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat and share this with everybody. Well, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure. Awesome. And don't hesitate to contact us if you think we could do some work for you. We like interesting projects, and we like nice people. Yeah, fantastic. And make sure when you email Kathleen, do a little bit of research first, and you're looking for a sewing contractor, not a manufacturer. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you. Yep. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to episode 15 of the Successful Fashion Designer podcast. If you'd like to learn more about any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit the show notes at sfdnetwork.com/15. And since you made it this far, you must have liked the episode. If you can take 60 seconds to leave a review on iTunes, it helps the show a lot and makes the podcast easier for people to discover. It's super easy to do, and I'd really appreciate it. Visit sfdnetwork.com/review to leave your rating. Thanks for your support and help.